So I've been trying to think about ways to solve the problem of zombie grabs and hit detection and all of that. Um, there's the problem of latency is very hard to solve in this case. Um, so I'm gonna go through like an easy scenario and then some scenarios where it gets progressively more complicated to figure out how to, decide what to do. So if I have this scenario where this red thing here is a zombie and this is a player and they're both standing still, and then on the next frame, the uh, the zombie decides to start moving towards the player, and the player just stands still, and the player just keeps standing still, and then on the next frame, when the zombie is near the player, it does the hit detection to say, "Hey, is the player in range of my grab?" And because they're moving forward, they are. And because the player is standing still, this is good. This is a valid situation. Where it gets a little bit more annoying is in the same scenario, but if the player starts moving on frame 2, but their ping is 50 milliseconds, meaning that the time between it takes for uh, the command that they sent that they started moving gets to the server, they've already moved on their screen. But on the server, they're still standing there. So when the zombie gets close enough and they're going towards where the player used to be, um, it does the check and the player is still standing there on the server, even though on the player screen they've moved away and they'll get grabbed. Here's another similar situation, but it should be a little bit more familiar. Uh, Say that you're attacking the zombie that is a fair distance from you. So you're walking towards the zombie and you intend to hit it and then fall back because you want to evade its range. So what happens is the zombie is walking towards the player and the player is walking towards the zombie, and then the player hits the zombie. So they're right next to each other, but the zombie hasn't decided that it's close enough yet because maybe the player's range is a little bit longer. So then when the player sees that they hit the zombie, they go, okay, and they move back. But because of the delay, the player's still technically moving towards the zombie. So on the server side, the player is standing right next to the zombie and quite close. It would be even closer if the server hasn't even registered that the player has moved away. Um, and because of that, the player or the server does the check and the player's in range, and so they get grabbed, even though on the player's side they're not even nowhere near the zombie. Here's a scenario where the player is the one that is dealing with the lag compensation here. So imagine a player is running sideways towards a zombie that is pursuing them, and so the player passes the zombie, and on their screen they hit the zombie and they hear the sound and everything. But because of their latency, 50 milliseconds pass before the server is even told that this is what the player has done. But by this time, the player has already moved past the zombie, and the zombie is lagging behind because they're slower, and also because they're still chasing like where the player used to be. And so it does this check and it goes, well, that's too far. There's no way that this player has hit this zombie. They're way outside of their melee range. But we can account for this in a number of ways. But another thing that a lot of games do, specifically for when a player's done an action against another player, is they keep track of where all the entities have been for the last second or so. This is the way that Valve does it in their game. So they'll say, okay, the zombie's actually here and the player's here. But because they can measure the amount of time that it took, because they have a synchronized clock on the client and the server, they can measure this time. So they know 50 milliseconds have passed, and so they can rewind where the zombie it was and also rewind where the player was and see, okay, they were actually close enough to register this hit. Even though technically on the server right now, this is what the server sees, is the player over here and the zombie over here. But I don't think I can do this for the other way around because there's no measurable delay in a case like this. There's no measurable delay because it's from the zombie's perspective, where the zombie is the one saying, hey, I grabbed the player. But there's no way for the server to know that the player has moved because they haven't received the command yet. So the server just sees the player standing there. Even if the player has moved itself, the command that it has moved has not been sent to received by the server yet. So how is the server ever supposed to know? It can't know. And you can't predict the future, so I'm really stuck. I don't know what to do about this.